The Day the Dancers Came by Bienvenido Santos. Author's background. Bienvenido Santos was born on March 22, 1911 in Tondo, Manila. He died on January 7, 1996. He is a Filipino-American. His period was during the 20th century. His genres are fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. His family roots are originally from Lubao, Pampanga, Philippines. He lived in the United States for many years, where he is widely credited as a pioneering Asian American writer. At the age of 83, he has authored 14 books, won numerous prestigious literary awards, and is widely anthologized and is required reading in schools, both in the Philippines and in numbers of the United States. Awards, honors, and prizes. First, Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship at the University of Iowa. Second, Guggenheim Fellowship. Third, Republic Cultural Heritage Award. Fourth, Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Short Fiction during 1956, 1961, and 1965. Fifth, Fulbright Program Exchange Professorship. Sixth, American Book Award from Before Columbus Foundation. Seventh, Honorary Doctorate in Humanities and Letters in University of the Philippines. Eighth, Honorary Doctorate in Humanities and Letters in Bicol University. And lastly, Honorary Doctorate in Human Letters in Wichita State University, Kansas, USA. Works. Short stories. First, You Lovely People in 1955. Second, Brother, My Brother in 1960. Third, The Day the Dancers Came in 1967 and 1991. Fourth, Scent of Apples in 1979. Fifth, Dwell in the Wilderness in 1985. Novels. First, The Volcano in 1965. Second, Villa Magdalena in 1965. Third, The Praying Man in 1982. Fourth, The Man Who Thought He Looked Like Robert Taylor in 1983. Fifth, What the Hell for You Left Your Heart in San Francisco in 1987. Poetry. First, The Wounded Stag in 1956 and 1992. Third, Distances in Time in 1983. Third, March of Death. Non-fiction. First, Memories Fictions, A Personal History, 1993. Second, Postscript to a Saintly Life in 1994. Fourth, Selected Letters, Book 1, 1995. Fourth, Selected Letters, Book 2 in 1996. Summary of the story. The Day the Dancers Came by Bienvenido Santos. Phil and Tony were both old Filipino men living in Chicago ever since World War II ended. Phil described himself as an ugly old man and described Tony as a good-looking gentleman that looked younger than he really was. The story was basically about a group of Philippine dancers were arriving in Chicago that day, and Phil thought that it would be an excellent idea if he took the dancers around the city, showed them the sights, and invite them back to his place for some adobo and chicken relleno. For the first part of the story, Phil constantly talked about the dancers to his friend and roommate Tony. Phil and Tony have been friends pretty much ever since they moved to the US, and the entire time Tony had been suffering from a disease that frustrated many doctors, in which caused gradual peeling all over his body. When Tony left for the doctor, Phil left a little later to meet the dancers at the hotel. When he got there and saw all the dancers, he completely forgot what he wanted to say and lost all train of thought. So, when he finally managed to gather up all the confidence he had left to invite them to his house, they would just move away or say, "No thanks, we're too busy." Later that night, he ended up going to the show alone since Tony hadn't yet returned from the doctor. Despite the disappointment he had earlier that day, Phil contemplated that if he would just record the show on his tape recorder, he would have the sounds with him to help him remember the dancers, the show, and bring back past memories. When he got home, he noticed that Tony was back. Tony commented that the dancers weren't with him and that he knew they never would have came with him in the first place. Phil then started to listen to his tape recorder, and his failure from earlier that day no longer mattered to him because his recording had brought him a certain feeling and it just filled him up with different memories and emotions. While he listened, Tony was yelling from his room, telling him to shut his recorder off. When he asked Tony what the doctors had to say, Tony wouldn't answer. Tony then asked what the dancers were like, and Phil told him that they were really beautiful, young, and graceful. He heard Tony let out a sigh, but as he looked down to the tape recorder he held in his hands, he noticed that the spools were spinning, and he finally realized that he had pressed erase. When he tried to play it back, there was nothing except for a screaming part of the finale with drums and the tolling of the bell. When he looked outside, it was already morning. The end. Analysis.
One the stage patients everyone, specifically our course instructor in EL113 none other than Manuel Gibiran. So I am here virtually in front of you to share an insight about the analytics of the story, the day that made the dancers life. Okay, so it is a Filipino immigrant, Phil Again, wrote this story as an excitement for the Filipino dancers who danced with the Hamilton, and it is their mere thought that the Filipino dancers, most specifically, not just dancers but mostly the Filipino, satisfies Phil Akayan in this story. He fed all the characters in the story with righteousness in dancing and the way how they support Filipino dancers in terms of what they like and what they in the moves of Hamilton. So moreover, it was satisfied and been served as a beautiful scenery and movement of Filipino, not just for dancers and mostly for all.